Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for the product demo webinar of Everbridge Visual Command Center. Our presenter today is Greg Mama. He is a product marketing manager with Everbridge. And before we start, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping rules. You can send us your questions throughout the webinar. If you have any questions, you can enter them in the chat box on the bottom right hand corner of your screen. At the end of the demo, Greg will answer all of your questions. And if due to lack of time, we are not able to get to all the questions, we'll make sure to follow up with you individually after the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and will be available on demand once the webinar is done. So now I'll hand over to Greg.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today. I'm going to spend the next half hour or so walking you guys through Visual Command Center. We're going to start with a very brief explanation of critical event management, just because Visual Command Center plays a critical role in our strategy for helping customers manage critical events. Just to quickly explain, a critical event is anything that impacts your organization, operationally or causes downtime or causes a risk to safety. So a critical event can be a weather event, it can be an IT outage, a hazardous materials event, a terrorism event, really anything that has the potential to impact your business. The common approach for dealing with a critical event is really a four-phase approach, and you may have heard a similar approach with different words, but I'm going to quickly go through what our approach is, and that's this wheel here to the right-hand side, the red wheel. First, to become aware of a critical event and actually understand a little bit about that event and whether it has the potential to impact your business. That's the assess phase. The idea being here that you need to know about events that are happening in proximity to your assets, whether it's a building or a traveler or any other type of asset that you're tracking. And you need to become aware of those events and be able to investigate them and see if they have the potential to impact your organization. The second phase is locating your potentially impacted assets as well as locating responders. So identifying who and what is at risk and identifying who and what can respond to that event and potentially help you mitigate or avoid that risk altogether. The third phase is action. This is probably the richest capability of the Everbridge platform. Taking action is doing what you need to do to mitigate that risk or deal with the aftermath. And that can be anything from sending communication all the way out to executing a full-blown crisis management plan with multiple teams, multiple people receiving task list assignments, and so on and so forth. And the last step is analytics. It's being able to understand your performance in any given situation. We provide a number of different reports and statistics out of the platform that help you gauge your performance, identify gaps, and improve continuously over time. So the goal here is really to help you get better at managing those critical events. Now, Visual Command Center specifically is designed to solve a challenge that we see across our customer base and really across industry in general, particularly for larger organizations. The challenge is an information challenge. When we first walk into a command center, we often see an environment that looks something like this. What we have here is a single place where a lot of information is flowing in. The problem is that this information isn't correlated. For example, I may be watching social media for information about different events that could impact my organization. I might be monitoring weather. I might be monitoring traveler locations or facility locations. But this information typically isn't brought together into what we call a common operating picture. So the goal with Visual Command Center is actually to provide you with a common operating picture. We're going to take your assets, so everything that you care about, whether it's a person or a facility or a roadway or a college campus, whatever's important to your organization, we're going to take all of that information and put it in one geospatial place. That's Visual Command Center. Then around each and every one of those assets, we're going to monitor for all of the risks that are important to you. So, of course, we provide many different sources of risk in the platform, and it's also possible to integrate outside sources of risk. And that can be anything from, your access control system to maybe a provider that we haven't integrated with ourselves already. As long as we can get to that data in an appropriate format, we can integrate that into the common operating picture. So the goal with VCC, with Visual Command Center, is to create that common operating picture. And this is a great place from which you can drive your risk management program. So let's jump into the interface now. We'll actually take a look at Visual Command Center and explore some of the functionalities. First, let's just kind of get you oriented. We have a map, obviously. It shows various things, and we'll get into what those things are here momentarily. On the right-hand side, this is what we call our feed control. This is where we manage all of the data that's coming into that common operating picture, and we'll drill down on those next. Down at the bottom, just it's worth mentioning, events not only occur in a place, but they typically occur in a time context as well, a temporal context. So the idea here is to not only know where something is happening, but know when it started and know when potentially it may end. So you've got that time perspective on an event as well as having the geolocation information. So let's look at the feeds. Let's actually take a quick peek here. I've got, first we'll start with assets, and I've got a variety of different types of asset that are lit up at the moment. The assets, you can see these small blue dots on the screen, and as I zoom in, you'll actually see, different icons appear based on the type of asset. Each asset has its own properties. In this case, I think the properties are pretty straightforward. It's just some simple information about each facility, but this is configurable. So you can put in other properties. You can put in links to other things, like a link to something that's relevant for that particular site, and that can all be inserted in the properties of the organization. I'm going to zoom out again, and I'm going to light up my contacts. One of the really powerful things within Everbridge is that I can take my existing contact information. If you're an Everbridge customer today and you have contacts, we can actually bring those contacts directly into Visual Command Center and monitor them for risk. So what I'm seeing here is that I have over 50,000 contacts worldwide, and the lighter the blue color, the greater the density of contacts. So if I zoom in on Texas, for example, and we zoom into the Dallas area, what we'll see is eventually those blue areas would resolve down to individual locations. And we have a lot of contacts in this area, so now here I'm down to an individual location. You can also see I've got my supply chain assets selected, and I've got a few simple supply chains documented here. If I click on this, it'll give me some basic details about my supply chain, and I can actually have additional details about my route stops. I can have details about my my value pairs, and so on and so forth. So lots of different types of assets can be incorporated into the platform. People, roads, areas, your customers, your suppliers, whatever is important and relevant to the operation of your business can be classified as an asset and brought into the platform. The next piece we'll look at is risk events. These are the different sources of risk that the platform is monitoring. At the top, this is operator entered risk. This is risk that you can input into the system yourself. So we're not just relying on external sources. If you become aware of an event, you can input it directly into the system and manage that event throughout, within Everbridge. Next is our RIMC, which is our NC4 powered risk information. You may be aware that Everbridge recently acquired NC4, and we've fully integrated NC4 risk events, advisories, and global flashpoints into the Visual Command Center platform. That comes with Visual Command Center. All packages will have this risk data available to you. And then as I move down, you can see I have a variety of other types of risk information as well. We have data from our mobile app. So if somebody hits an SOS in our mobile app, we would see an alert. We have the Everbridge Nixle feeds, which are primarily US-based feeds from law enforcement agencies. Weather events in the US, these are things like the storm boxes that you'd see for a tornado warning or a severe thunderstorm watch. Earthquakes, which is global coverage, floods, which is global, hurricanes, which is global, should probably say typhoons too, wildfires, which is primarily based in the US, and then partner data. For example, International SOS is one of our strongest partners, and we can bring their data into the platform. And you can see we've got Anvil and Data Miner as well. So again, sticking with that theme of a common operating picture, we're taking all the things you care about and all of the risk that you want to monitor and putting them into one place. The last sort of feed data that I'll talk to you guys about is contextual information. This is to help you understand the situation around any given event. And we'll actually use some of this when we drill down on a couple of risk events here in the platform next. I'll explain very briefly, weather forecast information is global, and we have live radar and other live feeds for various regions of the world, including the US and Canada, Europe, Japan, and Australia. So wherever we can get live radar, we do make that available for our customers. You've got traffic conditions and even access to traffic cameras that are included with the product, country, state, county borders, airports, traveler information can be integrated in the platform so I can see someone's itinerary. And then a variety of other options as well. Some of these are grayed out because I'm zoomed out to the whole world, but they will appear as I get closer to a particular country or region. So police and fire, hospital locations, some important hurricane information like storm surge data and hurricane evacuation routes, shipping lanes, rail lanes, ports, so on and so forth. So contextual data is data that you use to evaluate a situation. Things like traffic details and weather can give you critical clues as to what's happening in an event and how you may choose or want to respond to that particular situation. So let's look at the map and let's look at an actual alert now. Every red paddle that you see on the map is a risk event that's happened close enough to at least one of our assets to generate an alert. This means this is something that we actually need to check on. So give me a sec. I'm going to type in a situation, and I know we should probably investigate. There's a current event at this location in California that is actually a wildfire type situation, and this was actually updated midnight last night. As you guys may or may not be aware, we're having a lot of issues with wildfires in California at the moment. So this is one of the alerts that was issued by our organization. So I'm going to actually close this out now, and we can go to the alert itself. We'll select the alert. That's going to drill us out a little bit, and it's going to calculate for us all of the assets that are in the area. We actually have over 2,000 employees in this particular area. So it's a very high density area for us. And you guys saw how quickly that was pulled up. Many of these employees may have multiple locations. For example, they may have a home address as well as a work address, or they may have an address and be carrying our mobile app. So we'd be able to track them that way. So one of the first values we bring is the ability to instantly know who and what is within the potential risk zone of this event. You don't have to figure that out. The platform figures it out for you. And we don't care what type of asset it is, whether it's a building or a person, all that information is aggregated for you. Now, in this case, it happens to be only people that are in this specific area. Now, there may be a couple of things I want to do to assess this situation and take a look around the area. I can drill in, for example, and we can look and see contextually, are there traffic cameras that may give us more information? Are there traffic conditions and road closures as a result of this particular event? And it looks like I don't have anything that's close to the actual location of the fire, but I can monitor traffic cameras. Like here's a current camera from the California region. Here's another, that one may not be connected at the moment, but the idea being that I can use these tools to investigate the situation around an event. I happen to know that over in London today, we actually had some bad weather, and I think we are still having some bad weather. So let's light up our weather forecast, and we're going to look at our live satellite and radar. And I can zoom in on the London area. It looks like most of the weather has probably cleared at this point. But what I can do, for example, to show you that it's actually raining, is light up our traffic cameras in that area. And as I zoom in and hover over a camera, I would pick the one that's unavailable. I'm picking several that are unavailable. Let me try a different one. There you go. So you can see it's actually raining at the moment in London, which just verifies our report from the weather that we're having an issue. So we can provide context around an event using this information, which can help us identify an appropriate way to respond to that particular event. I'm going to turn off our weather layer, and we're actually going to go back to California. I want to show you guys a couple of actions that I could potentially take to manage risk or to help respond to risk around a particular area. You can see here I've actually got some fire watches and red flag warnings, which are indicative of a fire risk in an area. You can see actually that these are from the National Weather Service. We'll pick this fire weather watch as an option, and we'll use that. So the National Weather Service has issued this fire weather watch warning for us. We can see the details about that watch here, and the system is currently calculating the assets that are potentially impacted by that. And again, because we have so many in that area, sometimes it can take a little bit to do that. We have 11,000 plus people in the area, as well as some buildings and other assets that are potentially impacted. Now, in terms of taking action, there's a couple of things that I can do right from this interface. One would be to launch communication regarding this specific event. So if I needed to notify the people in the area, if I needed to notify stakeholders, all of my messaging that I have within the Everbridge platform is also available through the Visual Command Center interface. So in this case, I might select a scenario, which would send multiple messages, and then I might pick an appropriate type of situation for this. And I actually don't think I have a fire scenario set up, but the idea here would be, we'll just use protest in the meantime, that all of the information from the event would be collected, and I could enter additional information, such as the building, that was impacted by this particular situation. When I launch this, it's a pre-configured communication that's going to go out to everyone who needs to receive information about this area and this particular type of event. So by configuring all that in the background, I've got a pretty powerful tool for communicating with others. The other thing I can do here is I can actually launch a critical event. This is going to be a response plan that I can use to respond to the event. And I'll just use a fire evacuation as a simple example. But when I select the event, it's going to take a moment. It's going to load up all of the communications that I can use. It's going to load up all of the information that it has, including task lists for people who may need to perform certain tasks, like floor wardens who need to clear floors, for example. And it'll load up other information, such as supporting documentation, like how to plan an evacuation. Now, I can use this critical event interface to launch those task lists, which will send them automatically to people's mobile devices. I can launch communications, which will send messages as appropriate. And I can also do things like look at my affected assets. I can keep a running commentary of all notes that are put in by my remote people. They can also attach files and images and things like that. So this is one of the views that I can have into my crisis management plan as I'm working my way through this particular event. Now, there's obviously a lot of detail here we're skimming over just because we're on a limited time frame, but we're certainly happy to dive down into these capabilities in more detail, if you'd like to engage with us further. The next thing I want to quickly cover is how we get data into the system and how we configure it and how it can be displayed. So I've gone over to a new tab in Visual Command Center. This is a tab that's available to administrative users, and this allows us to configure the data that's actually coming into Visual Command Center. So, for example, if we wanted to look at our RIMC feed, this shows me how I can configure that feed to support my business requirements. Now, for each type of event, the RIMC reports, I have configuration options, and this actually can get pretty discrete. For example, I can cover multiple categories of hazmat, and I can determine, the severity of events that I actually want reported to me and the area around that event that I want to monitor. So what this is saying is if I have a wildfire within 16 kilometers that's been identified as at least a medium severity event, I'm going to generate an alert for this. Now you can also monitor all different types of events and have an alert generated for all of them. This always alert checkbox lets me do that. So if you, who are responsible for fire safety, want to be alerted whenever there's a fire event, even if it's not near any of your assets, we can turn that on as well. Next, we have supply chain assets. This is really pretty straightforward. It's going to be your routes, your route stops, and your origin destination pairs. If you don't know much about supply chain, those are important things. If you do know a little about supply chain, then you'll know what I'm talking about. These can be imported. Basically, I can add routes and places that they stop and determinations on what a particular location relies on. Once I've got my data in place, I have feed controls, and this controls how the data actually displays in Visual Command Center. So for example, if I want to look at my assets and I want to show you guys how my supply chain assets are displayed, this will show me that. It'll show me what the stops are displayed as, including a color for the icon, and it gives me the ability to filter and sort that information. So when I'm working with the feeds and live product, I can do things like that. These are your communication settings. This simply shows me, if you guys recall, I was able to send a message to people based on various priorities, and this is how I would configure the message sending. We can also automate message sending, so if a certain type of event happens and generates an alert, we can have the platform automatically send a message to everybody in the area. A good example for that might be a tornado issue. And then last but not least, this is how we can configure Visual Command Center to be used in a command center or across multiple rooms in an organization. So, for example, if we look at my home office, this is the configuration of my monitors. We recently demonstrated at the GSX 2019 show. This was our wall configuration for that show. If any of you happen to visit us, you may remember we had 4 screens together showing our map, and then we had individual screens showing additional data. So what you can do is build different rooms. Now keep in mind, you don't need a command center to use Visual Command Center. We actually have plenty of customers who don't have that room environment. You still use the room builder to output information to specific locations or specific people. And my home office is a great example of how we would do that. Now, what you put on these screens are channels, and we'll take another look at my home office in the channels view, and this allows me to configure what displays on each one of my screens. I've got 3 monitors. Right now, I'm using this monitor to actually run the webinar, and this status channel is what's actually displayed. And that's my last tab over here. So when I click, you're going to see the content that's actually being driven to this channel. And this is just a browser session. It can be put on any monitor where you have access to a browser in the internet. So with customers that do have command centers, often there's some pretty complex video hardware and software associated with that. We are, in a sense, sort of immune to that. Basically, if you can get a browser to a screen, then you can get Visual Command Center content, dashboards, and channels, to that browser. So it's actually quite straightforward to deploy this information out to the organization. Okay, that's covering the very brief demonstration of the product now. We've got a few minutes left over for questions at this point. So I'd be happy to take some questions and answer them to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Greg. And now if we have any questions, please go forth and put them in the chat box. So we got our first question. If we use VCC, can we add our own risk sources?
Yes. Yeah, you absolutely can. So there's an interface within Everbridge. We're going to get techie for a second here. There's an interface we have called the Risk Event Interface, and that allows you to pull in data from other sources. Like maybe you have a geo RSS feed you like, or a particular source that offers up data in a web service. We can integrate with that through REI and pull that into the common operating picture. So thank you.
The next question we have is, can you bring in live police, fire, EMS audio using Broadcastify that streams live audio from all over the country from participating agencies?
If that has an API that we can connect to, then yes, we can. I'm actually not familiar with that particular provider, but that doesn't. There's a lot of them out there. You know, there are even mobile apps out there where you can monitor from participating agencies now. So it all comes down to the API and what information is actually available from that source. But if we can get to it, then we can incorporate it into the common operating picture.
Thank you. The next question we have is, you mentioned end users were able to send in images. Can they stream in video to the VCC?
They can stream video through the SOS feature of the mobile app. So what will happen is the user in the mobile app will tap SOS, and then live audio and video from the user's device, actually the forward-facing camera, will stream directly into VCC. So what that would look like is we'd get an alert in the platform, and I could click on the alert, and I don't think I have any live videos at the moment, but as a part of that alert, you'd see a video window down here, and it'd actually be playing the video and audio from that user's device. So if a user just needs to report something, then typically what we have them do is take a picture in the mobile app and submit that. But we realize that's not always going to be enough. So that capability is provided through the SOS feature in the mobile app.
Okay, the next one is, how up-to-date are the maps?
That's a fantastic question, actually. We use Bing as our source map. So we are somewhat dependent upon Bing for updating their map tiles. In high population areas, they tend to be updated relatively frequently, at least a couple of times a year. In other areas, more remote, I've seen tiles as old as like 4 years old. So quite honestly, it does depend on the region and the pace with which Bing keeps the map tiles up to date.
Okay. I have a command center with a video wall. Do I need any special hardware or software to use VCC?
No, you do not. As I said before, if you get a browser session on a screen and you're connected to the internet, then you can access VCC, you can access the channels. Frankly, you can access all of Everbridge Suite. So we are 100% SaaS solution, no software installed on premise. Basically, if you can get a browser to a screen, then you can work with our products on that screen.
And our final question being, does VCC provide live news, video, or is that just a separate connection?
So our RIMC monitors something like 20,000 different sources, including news sources. So we typically would use that or one of our partner sources to pull in data from the media. That can include images at this time. It doesn't include live video. Again, I think this comes down to the API, and does that source have that information available to us in a format that we can consume? And if it does, then we can. If it doesn't, then there's probably a technology solution that would need to be implemented for that challenge.
Thank you, Greg. So that's all the time we had for questions today. Thank you everyone for joining us today. If your question wasn't answered during the session, we'll follow up with you individually, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.